another message I'd like to give to you. There are niches available, and sometimes when you get into those niche, a very large chasm opens up, a big door opens up for you to have a bigger opportunity. But keep on moving forward in areas which are new, which have not been taken over by the established business houses. And I found those areas in a variety of ways. In the 80s, I brought India's first push-button telephone. Until then, perhaps, I don't know, many of you would have probably never dialed a rotary phone. We all grew up on those rotary phones, and when I started my journey in telecom, there were less than 1 million fixed line phones in the country, in the entire country. And most of the time, when a child was born in a reasonably well-off family, a phone was booked so that by the time he becomes adult, he'll get a phone connection. So we have come a very, very long way. So I saw this opportunity in a trade fair in Taiwan, and my romance with telecom started. This was 82 October, and then I introduced India's first cordless phone, first answering machine, first fax machine, and finally got my big opportunity in 1992 when the government decided after the liberalization to allow mobile phones in the country, and importantly in the private hands. I was still a rank outsider. My balance sheet was very small. So small that nobody gave me a chance, because telecom, as all of you know, is a very, very, very deep pockets business. Thank God I didn't realize how deep it was, because had I ever known that it required thousands of crores, I would have not even gone on this journey. But what inspired me was an entrepreneur in the US called Craig McCall. He was at that point in time building a coast-to-coast mobile company in the US. And when I tracked him, what he was doing was he was starting with a very small region and then slowly moving around the US coast and creating, at that time, Macau Cellular, which no more exists. It was taken over by other bigger companies. And what I learned from that particular experience was that telecom, unlike a steel, cement, fertilizer, or a refinery, doesn't need large investments on day one. You don't need a 5 million ton refinery or a 5 million ton steel plant. What you need is an area which you can serve, and in my case, it was very clearly one city, and that's what I bid for, Delhi. And if you can do that well, and there also you can grow with 10,000 connections and go to 100,000 connections, get on to 1 million connections. So the modularity of the business was well understood by me. 30 business houses, India's who's who, after having tied up with the world's best, made a bid for the mobile licenses. 14 were shortlisted, finally 8 were granted a license. I, as a rank outsider, got one of those licenses to provide telecom services here in Delhi. And the reason was that some of us, younger entrepreneurs, Anandjit Singh of Max, myself and few others, understood the technology, understood the networks much more deeply than the large business houses. Our bid was significantly superior. More importantly, we took a bet. The large amount of bidding was on how much will you charge a customer in terms of monthly rentals. The charges for per minute were fixed by the government in the tender. You had to only quote how much will you charge the customer per month. For us, the equation was simple. If there's a customer, he will use the phone. At that time, of course, there was no data, and he will pay some money on the minutes he uses. Therefore, that equal to no requirement of monthly rental. So some of us quoted 0. 3 of us did that. And the Tatas, the Birlas, all the big houses were between 900 and 1,000 rupees. They missed the trick. And as they say, rest is history. I built India's finest telecom company, which has now gone global. It is the third largest telecom company in the world after China Mobile and Vodafone. And how was this possible? Yes, certainly we put a lot of passion, we put a lot of energy, great teams were built. But it's also because this country gave us an opportunity to build a model which was based on scale. In the US, when you take a mobile phone, you have to commit $40, $50, $60 at the very minimum. Mostly it's $80, $90 a month. In India now, the average tariffs where it is today, the average revenue per phone is about $2 a month. Same technology, same equipment, same effort. Spectrum now even more expensive than the US. Yet you can probably make a business case because there is a large volume that moves in your network every day. So the benefit of scale that a country like India gives allows us to build a very affordable, high quality business in India. And that's what we have carried forward outside. So the next wave is now coming in, and let me share with you also that large companies, as I found them sleeping long time back, is happening again. It's a universal truth. Large companies miss a heartbeat. They occasionally don't read the markets well. Importantly, they become lazy. So in the last 7 or 8 or 9 years, a lot of companies have picked up opportunities right under our noses within our space, and have built businesses around messaging, around social networks, around various apps, and they have shifted a lot of business away from the telecom companies with very little capital but smart ideas. And that is what I was talking about right at the beginning. The world has dramatically altered now. Young entrepreneurs have a chance now because the world is connected. You have people connected onto the internet, and the possibilities are unlimited. It's unbelievable what you can do. You can provide education, you can ensure healthcare is taken care of, you can ensure financial inclusion, which is almost an impossibility in a country like India or Bangladesh or Africa. With a mobile phone penetration, a lot of things can be done. And this space is well settled. A lot of businesses will be built on the back of the code that we have built out, mobile telephony. What's next? There will be many business opportunities, but let me talk about some of the areas that I work in. Clearly, cloud and cloud computing is becoming the norm now. People are not going to be buying computers anymore. They will have very light touch machines in their hands, very powerful though, because even a mobile phone, as you know, is probably 1,000,000 times more powerful than the first computer. But everything will sit in the cloud. And that will create its own opportunities and equally its own stresses. Almost every second of the day, there are hundreds of thousands of cyber attacks that are happening. Cyber hacking, whether it's in the world of finance or it's in the area of terrorism, it is becoming a big issue. Because once you unleash a technology, there are also consequences that you have to deal with. Cyber security, therefore, is becoming one of the biggest opportunities that is going to come and be available to the entrepreneurs and to large and small companies alike. It's going to be hundreds of billions of dollars of business that comes through this cyber security, because everybody will want their privacy to be secured, everybody will want their transactions to be secured, and importantly, the nations will want to know that they are secure against any hacking threats that nations, as you know, have. So that's one area where a lot of activity is happening. The second is AI, artificial intelligence. Now that area is moving at a very rapid clip. AI is allowing right from very small applications to do things themselves, to do the big data analytics. No human being, no teams of humans can manage to deal with trillions of messages, terabytes of data that is moving around the networks. It can only happen through very, very large cognitive-based, artificial intelligence-based systems, and which is now becoming increasingly relevant. What needed months of analysis can be done now within less than a few minutes. You can have a full data of 350 million customers. You can segment them by their income groups, by their age groups, by their habit, who calls in the night, who calls in the day. Everything can be done within no time. It's real time. This data is being analyzed all the time. And accordingly, as the data gets analyzed, offers are put out, night plans for those who are in the night, students for example, and such like things are all automatically happening through this. Combine that with now what you increasingly hear now, the augmented or virtual reality. Just 10 days back, I had a chance to be in the Facebook Oculus, and now this is probably the latest version of the virtual reality piece. And I can tell you, I walked through that experience, and I could well have been in front of you here and touching each one of you, shaking hands with each one of you. The resolutions are amazing. You are in the middle of action. Now you combine these three things, the possibilities are endless now. You have AI, you have cloud computing, and you have augmented and virtual reality. The world is going to dramatically alter. It will have impact on logistics. It will have impact on people's movement, how they're going to operate, how they're going to work. The shifting of employment opportunities from one traditional areas to new areas that are coming up. There's going to be, to my mind, a tidal wave of change that we're going to see in the next 10, 15 years. I was in Davos just 10 days back, and over a dinner, Sebastian, who was the Google X original founder, was with me, and he told me that he is now ready with the first flying car. The only problem he is having with that is he wants a two payload, which means two people should go on it, and he's been able to manage to lift only one. Now, I used to, when I was small, used to read comic books which had the flying cars, and I never thought during my lifetime I would be able to see one. It appears to me that I will. In 10 years' time, you will really start seeing flying cars. And autonomous cars, which we call the driverless cars, is already becoming a reality. I was in Singapore in January. Prime Minister of Singapore does this annual session of 3 days with 8-10 outsiders, with the entire cabinet of Singapore. They sit and work around how Singapore should look in the next 5 years, a 5-year plan that they have. And Singapore may well go on the path of being the first country which will have no private cars. They want to go completely on a driverless cars. You press your app, the car comes to you, sit in it, you go to the next destination, and the car moves from that point to another point. And these are not all fantasies I'm talking about. These are all going to be reality in a lifetime. So, be prepared for big changes. You have learned through case studies, you've seen the sensations of each piece of management, HR, marketing, negotiations, technology, the support that you can get from technology. And all these will become very, very valuable mantras for you. But you need to combine them with the market realities which are fast changing. I can go on for hours. I'm sorry if I've taken too much time. But let me conclude by saying I'm delighted to be here with you today. The world out is waiting for you. It wants you, it needs you, this nation needs you. And I have no doubt, as was mentioned by Justice Singh, many of you will make big successes of your careers in being a scholar, maybe teaching somewhere, an entrepreneur, a professional, building large companies, serving the country or serving the country's interests abroad somewhere. You will all do remarkable things. In closing, I must also say I don't want to duck the message that I got from Justice Singh. I will privately sit down and discuss with him what can be done from Bharti Enterprises for this wonderful institution. And all I can say is that one area that I have personally chosen to work in terms of philanthropy is education. We do a lot of work in the area of education, and we do the hard part, because writing a check or giving out a chair and all is much easier. That is not a laborious task. But we now have a full-fledged foundation office populated with about 200 full-time people, 1,100 teachers. There are 260 schools in very deep rural villages, giving education to extremely poor children. 47% of them are girls. Free education, free books, free uniform, there's a computer in every school, midday meal. And some of these children will really make a big impact. And more importantly, once we reach a full potential of 100,000 children, we would have touched about 500,000 people at any given point in time on a continuous basis. We also have endowed a school in ISB Mohali, which is the public policy school, India's first public policy school, which has a tie-up with Fletcher School of Public Policy from the US. We have an IIT institute within the IIT Delhi, it's Bharti School of Telecom Technology and Management. It's been there for 10 years now. And similarly, we have done many other educational programs around the country. But our heart is in the villages. We really want to go and fix the problem of the primary, secondary level of education. And that's where we are focusing more and more. Mr. Nair is a born Keralite, but he's a Punjabi at heart. And he spent a lot of time in Punjab. And whenever I met him, he always told me, Sunil, you need to do something in Punjab. And the last thing that he left, when he left the Prime Minister's office was, you should think about a university in Punjab. And I can confirm that to you, sir, that we are in discussion with the Punjab government about where and how we should do it. Hopefully in the next few years we will see. And of course, it's very for all these children who are underprivileged and who need high quality education. And we hope we can, like I had an opportunity in my life, give opportunity to many of those out there. Thank you very much.